Harlen Davis had exactly $23 in his wallet, a daughter whose sneakers were too tight, and a broken zipper on his only jacket, yet somehow, he still managed to carry himself with the kind of quiet strength that made people trust him. It was just after 8 on a rainy Tuesday night in Manhattan. Harlen stood outside the crowded subway station, holding the hand of his 7-year-old daughter, Ava, who kept rubbing her eyes and stumbling from yawning too hard. He just picked her up from his sister's after finishing a double shift at the auto shop. "Daddy, my feet hurt," Ava mumbled. "I know, baby," he said gently, crouching to lift her into his arms even though his back was already aching. Almost home. He turned toward the stairs and nearly collided with a woman trying to balance a sleeping toddler in her arms and a large leather tote slipping off her shoulder. "Oh, sorry," she gasped, breathless, struggling to adjust the little boy who was completely knocked out with his head buried in her neck. "I got it," Harlen said instinctively, reaching out. "Here, let me carry him up for you. These stairs aren't friendly." She hesitated. Harlen caught the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. He was used to it. His worn jeans, the grease still under his fingernails, the heavy circles under his eyes. People didn't usually accept help from guys who looked like him, but then she gave a soft nod. "Okay, thank you." "He's heavier than he looks." Harlen adjusted Ava on one hip and gently lifted the sleeping boy with his free arm. "No problem," he said, starting the climb. "His name's Asher," she added, climbing beside him. "He's 3. "Cute kid," Harlen said, glancing at her. She was soaked from the rain, her dark coat clinging to her body, and her hair was pulled into a messy bun. She had this tired elegance about her, like she didn't belong here at all. "Yeah, he's something," she said with a quiet smile. "I'm Piper Bennett, Harlen Davis." "This is my daughter, Ava." Ava peeked over his shoulder and gave Piper a sleepy wave. "Hi," Piper smiled. "Hi, sweetheart." By the time they reached the top of the stairs, Harlen was breathing hard, but he didn't complain. He carefully handed Asher back. "You okay from here?" he asked. "Yes, thank you. Honestly, I don't know what I would have done without you," Piper said, brushing her son's curls from his forehead. "You're strong." Harlen laughed under his breath. "I work on cars all day. Got a bit of muscle left, I guess." "Still," she said, eyes lingering on him for a second too long. "That was kind of heroic." He shifted Ava in his arms. "Just being decent, nothing heroic about that." Piper bit her lip, then reached into her designer tote. "Can I give you something?" "Just no," Harlen said quickly, shaking his head. "Really, I didn't do it for that." She looked at him for a moment, then slowly nodded. "Okay then, can I buy you a coffee sometime?" He blinked. "Wait, what?" "Coffee," she said, smiling. "You seem like someone worth knowing." Harlen didn't know what to say. No woman had said anything like that to him in years, not since Ava's mom walked out. Sure," he said finally, clearing his throat. "I mean, yeah, I'd like that." She pulled out a business card and handed it to him. It said Bennett Capital in gold letters. "Call me," she said. "Whenever." Then she adjusted Asher in her arms and turned to walk into the night, her heels clicking softly against the wet pavement. Harlen stood there for a full minute after she disappeared, staring at the card. "Daddy," Ava whispered, "are we still going home?" He looked down at her, still stunned. "Yeah, baby, we are." 2 days later, Harlen took a risk and called. Piper answered on the second ring. "I was hoping you would," she said softly. They met at a small cafe near Central Park. Harlen wore his cleanest flannel shirt and borrowed shoes from his brother-in-law. Piper wore a cashmere sweater and barely any makeup. "You're not what I expected," she told him after he mentioned rebuilding engines for a living. "Let me guess," he said. "You thought I was a lawyer or something." "No," she said, smiling. "I thought you were one of those guys who pretends to be nice for 5 minutes. And now I think you're just good," she said quietly. "You have no idea how rare that is." He studied her for a second. "What do you do anyway?" "I run a finance company," she said, sipping her tea. "Inherited it from my dad. We manage investment portfolios. It's boring." Harlen raised an eyebrow. "You own Bennett Capital," she gave a sheepish smile. "Yeah, that's me." He leaned back. "So, you're like rich," she laughed. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said slowly, "but it's kind of funny. You're a millionaire, and I couldn't even buy Ava a new pair of shoes last week." Piper looked at him, her expression softening. I don't care about money, Harlen. Not when someone looks at me like you do. He swallowed hard. How do I look at you? Like you see me, she whispered. Not the money, not the name, just me. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them charged. Can I see you again? He asked. Yes, she breathed. Please? Over the next few weeks, they saw each other every chance they got. Piper started showing up at the auto shop with coffee and sandwiches. Harlen brought Ava and met Piper and Asher at the park. One night, Piper took him to a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. Harlen hadn't been anywhere that fancy in his life. This place has a dress code, he muttered, tugging at the borrowed blazer. I called ahead, Piper said, smiling. Told them you were with me. Harlen looked around at the crystal glasses and waiters in tuxedos. You're not messing around. I like you, Harlen, she said, reaching for his hand. I want you to see my world, and I want to see yours. He squeezed her fingers. I don't have much of a world, just Ava and a job that barely pays rent. You have more than that, she said softly. You have heart, you have loyalty, that's worth more than anything in my bank account. That night, as they stood on the rooftop balcony, Piper leaned into him. I've never felt this safe with anyone, she whispered. Harlen wrapped his arm around her. You're not the only one falling here, Piper. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. Then let's fall together. And just like that, two completely different lives started to become one. Harlen adjusted the torque wrench on the crankshaft, sweat beading across his forehead beneath the open garage bay. The heavy scent of motor oil hung thick in the air, but his mind wasn't on the Mustang he was rebuilding. It hadn't been for days. Harlen, Greg called from across the shop floor, wiping his hands on a rag. That woman's still coming around. Harlen didn't look up. Yeah, Greg whistled low. She drive that white Mercedes. Guess so. You guessing now? Greg raised an eyebrow. Because that woman looks like she stepped out of a glossy magazine. I don't need you reminding me what league I'm not in, Harlen muttered, snapping the wrench onto the next bolt. Nah, man. I'm just saying don't fall unless you know she's got somewhere soft for you to land. Harlen didn't answer. He tightened the bolt until it clicked, then set the wrench down. Later that night, he stood in front of his bedroom mirror, holding a button-down shirt that still had creases from hanging in the closet too long. Ava sat cross-legged on the bed, brushing her doll's hair. Are you going to see Miss Piper again? She asked without looking up. Yeah, Harlen said, rolling the sleeves. She got tickets to some kind of show. Is it a grown-up show or a singing one? Grown up, he said, watching her in the reflection, but not stuffy. She said it's outside and there's food after. Ava set her doll down. Will she bring Asher? Not tonight. He's with her nanny. Ava's eyebrows lifted. A nanny, Harlen turned to her. That just means someone who helps take care of him when she's working. Do rich people always have helpers? Not always. Depends. Ava tilted her head. Do you think she likes you? He paused. I think maybe she does. Good, Ava said firmly. Because I like her too. She listens when I talk. The show turned out to be a jazz concert in a garden lit by strings of warm lights and flickering lanterns. Piper wore a navy dress that moved like water when she walked. Harlen had never seen her in anything that made the air feel thinner. You clean up well, she said, eyes flicking over him as he approached. I borrowed the shirt again, he admitted. She smiled. Then tell your brother-in-law I approve. They sat down on a blanket she'd brought, already spread with containers of food he couldn't pronounce. He watched the musicians tune their instruments, but the music barely registered. Piper's hand brushed his once, and it stayed. I saw your daughter's drawing on your fridge, she said as the first song began. The one with the rocket ship. She wants to be an astronaut, Harlen said. If I could afford a telescope, I'd get her one. Piper reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. I wanted to give you this. Harlen froze. What is it? Just open it. Inside was a voucher for a private astronomy experience at a science museum, one that cost more than his paycheck. I can't take this, he said, jaw tightening. It's too much. It's not for you, she said gently. It's for Ava. That's not the point. Piper leaned closer, her voice low but steady. Then what is? I don't want her thinking we need charity. This isn't charity, it's a gift, and it doesn't come with strings. If I wanted to buy your silence or your time, I'd approach it differently. Harlen stared at her. You really think giving someone something expensive doesn't change things? She held his gaze. I think it depends on what you believe about me. He looked away, jaw clenched. I believe you're used to a world I don't belong in. Then let me ask you something else, she said softly. Why are you still here? He turned to her, his voice hoarse. Because every time I think I should walk away, I see your face and forget how. She didn't respond, just reached for his hand and linked her fingers through his. A week later, Harlen stood outside the Science Museum, watching Ava press her face to the glass of the observatory. Piper had arranged the whole thing without fanfare. She hadn't even attended, sending her driver instead to deliver the passes in a plain envelope. He watched Ava's eyes brighten as the telescope slewed toward Jupiter, and something inside him cracked. He hated how grateful he felt. Hated that she could do this with a phone call while he struggled to keep the lights on. That night, he called her. You didn't have to disappear after today, she said the moment she answered. I needed to think. Did the gift upset you that much? It didn't upset me, Harlen said, pacing the sidewalk outside his building. It scared me. Why? Because it reminded me how easy it is for you to fix things, and how powerless that makes me feel. There was silence on the other end. I don't want to be someone you take care of, he said. I want to feel like I bring something to the table. You do, she said, her voice sharp now. You bring honesty, you bring strength. You bring decency in a world that's starving for it. But that doesn't pay for school or shoes, or I'm not asking you to be anything but who you are. And what if who I am isn't enough? Then I'm the fool, she said quietly. Because I've never wanted anything more than the man who carried my child up a flight of stairs without asking for anything in return. Harlen closed his eyes. You're not a fool. Then don't treat me like one. He didn't say anything, but the silence between them felt heavier than words. The next day, Piper showed up at the shop. She stepped out of a black town car wearing jeans and a windbreaker that made her look like any other woman in the city. No makeup, no heels, just her. Can we talk? She asked, walking up to him where he stood beside a lifted hood. Harlen looked around. Here, you're not answering my calls. He wiped his hands on a rag. I didn't know what to say. Then I'll go first, she said. I don't care about what you have or don't have. I care about how you look at me when you think I'm not watching. I care about how your daughter feels safe in my arms, and I care that every time I leave you, I want to turn back. Harlen stared at her, heart thudding. You're not a project, Harlen. You're a man I've come to admire. And I'm not going to apologize for wanting to share what I have with someone who's earned my respect more than anyone I know. I don't need anything from you, he said, voice rough. I know, she said, but I want to give you something anyway, not because you need it. Because you deserve it. He stepped forward then, slowly, and reached for her hand. Then let's stop keeping score, she nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Agreed. And in that moment, beneath the hum of the city and the scent of grease and gasoline, something shifted not in the world around them, but in the space between their hearts. Harlen stepped into Piper's penthouse for the first time on a clear Saturday afternoon, gripping Ava's hand as they crossed the marble foyer. The apartment soared with glass walls that looked out over the city, sunlight catching on every gold accent and polished surface. Wow, Ava whispered, eyes wide, it's like a castle. Harlen gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Remember what we talked about, be polite. I am being polite, she whispered back. But castles are cool. Piper laughed from where she stood near the dining area, barefoot and dressed in soft linen pants and a sleeveless top. You can call it a castle, Ava. It's just a place with too many windows. Asher came charging around the corner with a toy airplane, crashing it into Piper's leg before spotting Ava. You came back, he shouted, running up to her. Ava crouched down. I brought my markers. You want to draw spaceships? Asher nodded vigorously, and the two of them dashed off toward the oversized rug in the living room. Harlen stayed near the entryway, unsure of where to put his shoes. Piper walked over and touched his arm lightly. You don't have to look like you're about to be interrogated. I've never been in a place with a chandelier in the hallway, he said. You'll get used to it, she replied. Not the chandelier, me. He looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. I'm trying. Come sit, she said, guiding him toward the kitchen where a bowl of fresh figs sat beside a loaf of crusty bread and imported cheese. I made lunch. Well, technically someone else made it, but I arranged it myself, he chuckled. That counts. They sat at the island. Piper poured them both lemonade from a glass pitcher filled with slices of blood orange. My mother called last night, she said after a pause. Harlen took a sip. Yeah, she asked me if I was seeing anyone. I told her I was. He raised an eyebrow. What'd she say? She said. Does he own or advise? Piper shook her head. She's always been obsessed with pedigree. I told her you rebuild engines and raise a little girl with more grace than anyone I've ever met. He sat back slightly. That go over well, she hung up, Piper said. But she'll come around, or she won't. I'm not changing who I love to make her feel better, Harlen blinked. Love? Piper looked at him directly. Yeah, I didn't mean to spring it on you like that, but I do. I love you, Harlen. He stared at her. You're not scared to say that. Should I be? He rubbed the back of his neck. You've got everything. I've got a kid who needs new glasses and a water heater that makes more noise than a freight train. She reached across the counter and took his hand. And yet, I'd pick your life over mine if it meant I could wake up next to you. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, quietly, I've never had someone say something like that to me. Well, get used to it, she said. Because I've got a lot more to say. They were interrupted by the sound of Asher shouting something about a spaceship crash. Piper smiled and stood up. Come on. Let's see what kind of disaster they've created. The living room was scattered with crayons, construction paper, and two kids lying on their stomachs drawing a city on Mars. Dad, look, Ava called out. We made a landing pad. Harlen crouched beside her. That's incredible. You even added solar panels. Asher tugged on Piper's hand. Can we have pizza later? We'll see, Piper said. Only if your hands aren't covered in marker by then. The afternoon passed with the kind of ease Harlen hadn't felt in years. When the kids eventually passed out on the couch, curled up under a fleece blanket Piper brought out from a cabinet, she turned on soft music and poured 2 glasses of wine. They sat on the balcony as the city lights flickered on below them. You ever think about what this all means? Harlen asked. What do you mean? This, us, them? He nodded toward the glass wall behind them. It's not simple, no, she said. But nothing worth it ever is. I don't want to be a phase for you. If I wanted temporary, Piper said, her eyes steady, I'd be at a gala right now, not sitting barefoot on a balcony drinking wine with the man I want to build a life with. He looked at her, and for the first time since they met, he let the guard drop completely. You're not a maybe to me, Piper, he said, but I don't know how to live in your world. Then don't, she said. Let's build our own. The next week, Piper invited Harlen and Ava to a fundraiser dinner. Not the kind with velvet ropes and models in gowns, but one hosted by a local community board raising money for after-school programs. She was on the board, and Harlen had helped fix their transport vans the month before. He wore a navy jacket he'd found in a thrift shop, and Ava wore a pale blue dress Piper had given her weeks earlier, and which Harlen had hesitated to accept until Ava looked at him like refusing it would break her heart. As they entered the event space, a renovated community center with string lights and a jazz trio in the corner, Harlen held Ava's hand tighter than usual. I don't belong here, he murmured to Piper. You belong with me, she said. That's all that matters. The evening unfolded in a blur of conversations, introductions, laughter, and clinking glasses. Harlen was surprised how many people already knew his name. Piper had apparently spoken about him long before tonight. Is it true you rebuilt the engine on the youth van in under 2 days? A man in a slate suit asked. Yeah, Harlen said. Didn't have much choice. Brakes were shot. You saved us thousands, the man said. We're grateful. Later, as Piper stood at the microphone thanking donors and board members, she paused midway through her speech. There's someone here tonight who doesn't know how much he's changed my life, she said. He probably doesn't even realize that just by being exactly who he is, he reminded me what real love looks like. Harlen, thank you for showing me courage and for showing my son what a good man looks like. A hush fell. Harlen felt every eye in the room turn toward him. But it was Ava who started clapping first, followed by Asher, then the rest of the room. Harlan's throat tightened, and when Piper stepped down from the stage and walked back to him, he didn't hesitate. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, applause still echoing around them. "I'm all in," he whispered against her temple. "No more doubts," she smiled through tears. "Then let's give them something real to believe in." And as they stood under the lights, surrounded by the city, the music, and a love that had grown from the most unexpected of meetings, neither of them knew it yet, but the biggest moment was still to come. The early autumn air was crisp as Harlen buttoned the collar of his shirt, standing in front of the mirror in Piper's spare bedroom, the one she had quietly started calling his without ceremony. Outside the window, the trees along the Hudson had turned the color of fire, and the city pulsed in the distance with its usual hum. But today felt different. From the hallway, Ava's laughter rang out as she and Asher chased each other, their socked feet skidding on hardwood. Piper's voice followed, warm and exasperated. Okay, enough laps, shoes on, hair brushed, you're not going to outrun the wedding." Harlen checked his watch. Only 45 minutes until the ceremony. He reached for the tie laying across the bed, staring at it like it might tie itself. "You're going to wrinkle your shirt," Piper said, appearing in the doorway. Her cheeks were flushed from chasing the kids, her hair pinned in a way that made her look like a dream wrapped in silk. "Do you want help?" Harlen held up the tie. "I forgot how to do this." "Haven't worn one since my cousin's funeral." She stepped in, her fingers deftly working the fabric. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "Just trying to believe this is real." Her hands paused. "You afraid I'll change my mind?" "No," he said, holding her gaze. "I'm afraid I'll wake up." "You won't," she whispered, "because this is the part where it gets better." The ceremony was held in a restored greenhouse tucked behind the community center Piper had introduced him to weeks ago. She'd insisted on something small, insisting that the only people who mattered already loved them. There were no celebrities, no press, no designer labels, just friends, kids with juice boxes, and the scent of freshly cut flowers rising up with the afternoon light. Ava and Asher walked down the aisle first, Ava clutching a small basket of wildflowers and Asher beaming with a satin pillow balanced on both hands. Piper followed, barefoot in the grass, her dress simple and flowing, her eyes locked on Harlen like he was the only man who'd ever stood still long enough to be seen. "Hi," she said when she reached him. "Hi," he breathed. "You ready?" "I've been ready since the moment I saw you on those subway stairs." She reached for his hand, her fingers threading through his, and the officiant began to speak. They didn't write vows. Piper said promises weren't about poetry, they were about action. So when she looked into his eyes, she didn't recite lines, she spoke with the kind of quiet certainty that made the room fall silent. "You held my son before you knew my name," she said. "And you held my heart before I knew I still had one to give." Harlen's voice cracked when he answered, but he didn't look away when he spoke. "You made me feel like I could be more than what the world said I was. And every day since, you've made me want to be better." When they kissed, it wasn't dramatic. It was real, deep, certain, the kind of kiss that said, "We've already survived the hard part, now we begin." Later that evening, at the reception Piper insisted be held in the community garden, Harlen sat on a picnic bench with a plate of grilled chicken and sweet corn, watching Ava run between tables with Asher, both of them sticky with lemonade and laughter. Greg walked over with a drink in hand, shaking his head. "You clean up all right, Davis," Harlen grinned. "You only saying that because my wife can buy your whole block." "I'm saying it because you look happy," Greg said. "And I haven't seen that in a long time." Harlen looked out over the tables, where Piper was laughing with a group of volunteers she'd brought to the fundraiser months ago. She caught his eye and raised her glass. "Yeah," Harlen said. "I am." As the sun dipped low, Piper found him again, barefoot once more, her heels forgotten under a table. "You realize we're married," she said, sliding onto the bench beside him. "I noticed." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know what I want next, I'm afraid to ask." "I want to buy that old garage on 5th, she said. "The one you said has the best light in the city for engine work." He turned to her slowly. "Piper, I want to invest in something that matters. You rebuilt lives in that shop. Mine included. I don't want to be your project. You're not. You're my partner, and I want to build something with you, not for you, with you." He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "On one condition. Name it. You let me do the work myself, no fancy renovations. No cutting corners." Her smile widened. "Deal." They sat like that while the kids roasted marshmallows and music played from a borrowed speaker. Harlan reached into his pocket and pulled out an old subway token, the one he'd kept since the night they met. "Thought I lost this," he said. "You didn't," she replied. "You just didn't know where it would take you." He pressed it into her palm. "Guess it brought me home." Piper wrapped her fingers around it, then leaned in and kissed him slow and soft. "Then let's never leave." And they didn't. They built the shop together. They raised their kids together. They argued and made up and danced in the kitchen with flour on their faces. They celebrated Ava's first science fair win and Asher's first time riding a bike without training wheels. They made a life not out of money or status, but out of the kind of love that showed up every single day. Because it had never been about castles or penthouses or grand entrances. It had started with one man helping a tired mother carry her sleeping son up a flight of subway stairs. And it ended with something rare and quietly extraordinary forever. The wind carried the faintest hint of salt, despite the city skyline rising behind them. Harlan stood at the edge of the dock, watching the water catch late morning light like scattered glass. Piper had told him to meet her here, no explanation, just coordinates and a time. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. She walked toward him wearing a slate gray coat belted at the waist, her hair swept up, a look in her eyes that didn't quite match the playful tone she'd used when she invited him here. "This isn't exactly your usual scenery," he said, squinting at the private yacht bobbing just beyond the pier. She glanced at the vessel, then back at him. "I was going to surprise you with a weekend away, but I changed my mind halfway here," he frowned. "Changed your mind about the trip?" "No," she said, stepping closer. "About the surprise, I don't want to keep anything from you, not anymore." "Not ever," Harlan straightened. "All right. I didn't just bring you here to get out of the city," she said, her voice steady but low. "There's something I haven't told you. It's not a secret exactly, but it's something I've avoided talking about. Because I didn't want to scare you off." He waited, silent but focused. "My father left me more than the company," she continued. "He left me shares in a shipping line. It's old money. I never touched the dividends except for endowments, and that yacht. It's technically mine." Harlan gave her a long look. "Why tell me now? Because I don't want you looking at that boat and thinking it's another wall between us. I'd rather you hate it if it means you still trust me." He took a step forward, closing the space between them. "I don't hate it. I don't care if you own 10 of them. I care that you told me." She breathed out slowly, almost like she'd been holding it in for longer than she realized. "And I care that you didn't lead with that. You waited until it mattered. I didn't want to be that person who hands you keys and calls it love. You've never done that," he said. "Not once." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. This was supposed to be part of the surprise. He took it, unfolded it, and stared down at the architectural renderings. It was a blueprint, the exterior of a familiar-looking brick building. The same garage he'd talked about months ago. "Blueprints?" he asked, brow furrowed. "I bought it," she said. "But only under one condition. The deed has both our names on it. You design the inside, you run it. I'll never interfere." He looked back at the paper, then at her. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." Harlan folded the paper carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket. "Then I guess I better start thinking about hiring a crew." Later that afternoon, they returned to the townhouse. The kids were inside with Piper's cousin, who had come into the city for the weekend. Ava ran to Harlan the moment he stepped in, holding a rolled-up sheet of paper. "Look what we drew," she said, tugging him toward the kitchen. "We made a space station that flies over Earth and drops food to people who don't have any." Asher followed behind, gripping a crayon-stained juice box. "And it has robot arms." Harlan knelt beside them, scanning the drawing. "This is incredible. You gonna build this one day?" Ava nodded. "Me and Asher are gonna be engineers." Piper leaned in the doorway, watching the three of them with something soft in her expression. Harlan stood, reaching for her hand without even thinking. That night, after the kids had gone to bed and the townhouse had gone quiet, Piper sat cross-legged on the couch. Flipping through a book of design samples Harlen had pulled from the glove box of his truck. "I was thinking," she said, "we could put a little reading nook in the garage's upstairs office for when Ava does homework after school." He looked up from his sketch pad. "You really want to turn it into a second home? I want to build something where all four of us feel like we belong." He set the pad down and stood. "Come here." She rose and let him pull her close, his hands resting low on her back. "I used to think I'd always be standing outside someone else's life, looking in," he said. "You were never outside mine," she replied. "You walked in and made it real." He kissed her then, not with urgency, but with certainty, a slow, warm kiss that said everything he hadn't needed to explain. Weeks passed. Construction on the garage began. Piper's company launched a new outreach program led by Harlen that trained under-resourced youth in mechanical skills. Kids who had never held a wrench before now showed up twice a week, eager to learn. Greg helped oversee the build. Piper's cousin returned to the city permanently to be closer to family and became the kids' part-time caregiver. The four of them, Harlen, Piper, Ava, and Asher, settled into something that didn't need defining anymore. It just was. One evening, as the seasons shifted again and the leaves turned brittle and gold, Harlen walked into the nearly completed garage. The floors were polished, the walls painted, the windows newly installed. A small corner office overlooked the main floor. And in that office sat a rocking chair, a shelf of books, and a framed photo of Ava and Asher covered in paint at a community event. He found Piper standing by the newly installed workbench, running her fingers over the wood grain. "Looks good, doesn't it?" he said, stepping beside her. "It's beautiful." Harlen pulled something from his back pocket, a small, square box. She turned, eyes widening slightly. "What's that?" He opened it. Inside was a slender gold band, inlaid with a narrow strip of iron from the first wrench he ever owned. "I know we already had the ceremony," he said, "but I wanted to give you something permanent, something forged." She swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes." He slipped it onto her finger and kissed the top of her hand. I love you more," she whispered. Years later, their garage became more than a business. It became a community hub, a place where second chances were earned and first dreams took root. Ava won her first engineering scholarship. Asher built a wind-powered water pump for school. And every night, without fail, the four of them sat down for dinner. No matter who had meetings or deadlines or client calls, they built a life not from money or legacy, but from the choices they made together. Choices based on love that was never loud but always lasting. And every so often, Harlen would take out the subway token from his wallet, run his thumb over the worn brass, and remember that all of it began with a single act of kindness on a rainy night. Not fate, not luck. Just love, real, honest, and built to last.